Let's talk about 5 ways to spice up your drum grooves and loops for more dynamic, impactful, and exciting rhythm sections. The very first thing that I like to do is switch up the sound of my backbeat. Now that refers to the 2 or 4 beat in a song. So just to be super clear, when we're talking about the backbeat, we're talking about this. That sound. And again, that comes in a lot of forms and shapes across different songs, your snare, snap, claps, anything that rests back there that really gives us the complete feeling of that groove. Sometimes when we have just one sample, it can get a little stale, and there's a lot of different ways to change the sound. I'm going to cover the most basic one, my go-to, which is adding a kind of reverb to that backbeat. And I'll do this every other hit. So as you can see here, I already have it demoed out for every other hit. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So every 4th beat, or we could do it every other bar like this. Now, in order to actually accomplish this, very simply, all I'm doing, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, is I'll go ahead and duplicate it out and put on some kind of a reverb. Typically, I want something that's a plate or a hall, something that feels really natural, something that feels just kind of universal. I don't want anything obtuse or really shocking with my effect here. I want it to feel like it's at home, and Little Plate by Sound Toys has been a great go-to for me. Very simple, typically doesn't get harsh, and it just sits where I need it to sit, especially when it comes to drums. So I'll go ahead and turn this on, and you can hear that obviously with the mix on full, we have a big splashy sound, which is exactly what we want. And now when we blend that with our original, we can just select what drum hits I want. Drum hits I want this change to happen on, and we are absolutely good to go. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and set it up to happen every other hit and have the pattern already good. Already a little more bounce, a little more excitement to it, or we could always go every other bar. And this really depends on the phrasing, which we're going to get to in a second, and how you want to express kind of this openness, this extra accent in the song. Maybe keep this tight. I'm falling on anxiety, swiping my reality away. And this is really variable. It's going to depend on the song. It's going to depend on the phrasing. It's going to depend on the tempo, how often these backbeats are happening. This is like a slow halftime groove. And I like it on every other beat because here it's actually happening at the ending of the chord progression. So it feels a little more intentionally cyclical with the song compared to me doing it every bar, every other hit. So that can be a subjective choice. There's also a handful of other things we could do. We could make it a shorter reverb. We could compress the reverb and make it really rambunctious, which wouldn't fit for this song. We could also do things like pitching the clap down, pitching our backbeat sound, whether it's a clap down to make it darker on one beat and lighter on another. But however we do it, I like to separate it out on different tracks and then only introduce it when we need it. So that way we can avoid having to do crazy automation and get stuck into a kind of pattern with our faders that we can't undo easily afterwards. So the second thing I want to talk about is creating 2 or 4 bar phrases with the rhythms of your grooves. Now, one of my favorite places to go to for this is the kick drum, because a lot of the times our snare or clap or snap, whatever our backbeat is going to be around the 2 or 4. And while we can't add ka, ba, ba, or bam, ra, ka, we can add little fills to it. I like to play with the kick drum placement because it feels, though the kick drum's typically a pretty present instrument, I feel like I can get away with more in the kick drum. So I'm going to show this to you on the kick drum. This can apply to anything you have in your groove. Again, just using this because it's one of my personal favorite places to go to create these cyclical phrases in rhythm. Now, when we create a lot of these grooves, we typically start, if you're not a drummer, you might just create a 1-bar loop. And that's not bad, but it can feel a slight bit stale when we hear that same 1 bar over and over. And I'm going to show that to you now. This is this first blue track. I'm falling on anxiety, swiping my reality away. No company. Now, we do have the snare with the reverb pop coming up every other bar, so we're getting some of that cyclical nature in the snare, but it feels like we're just missing, feels like the drummer's almost a little asleep, like a little sleeping on the job. I'm not opposed to having the same groove, the same bar, 1 bar groove foundation throughout certain instrumentation, but especially in a chorus, I want to have a little more excitement, and we can kind of create fulfilling feeling phrases when we have a little change in each bar. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what that sounds like with the 2-bar phrase on the kick drum. So whereas the first example, we have 1 E and a 2 E and a 1. Now this is a 2-bar phrase where we have bop, 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 bop. So we have just one extra kick hit, and it adds a lot of energy and excitement. So here is this second example with a 2-bar rhythm in the kick drum. I'm falling on anxiety, swiping my reality away. No company, no misery, just don't check my mental health. Subtle, but when I look at the excitement and the energy that it brings, it's really just, I don't know, it just makes me feel more engaged. Again, this phrasing goes, the 2-bar phrase, this A-B rhythm goes with the chord progression. It feels so much more whole and exciting for myself. When it comes to actually selecting a place to put this rhythm, I'll start by being around the neighborhood of where some of the existing kick hits are, but that's by no means a limitation. That's just typically where I'll look first. Now, I know because this is a pop song, we don't want to have too many things just sitting right on the eighth notes. That has more of a rock feel to it, especially at this tempo, so I knew I wanted to go off beat with it. Whereas if I went here and I had it on the eighth note, it would sound a little too on the nose, a little too much downbeat, a little rockier. Oh, I should probably saw the right thing. Already sounds just doesn't quite fit, but I know that as I move it to different 16th notes, it could fit fairly well, given that obviously the rest of the song is baked into a different specific pattern. So I like to play with 16th notes, especially when I add an extra kick hit. Again, this might even be an eighth note for you, depending on the tempo. If it's a faster track, but like boop 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 boop, like that could be a lot more sensical at a faster tempo. So whether it's a 16th or an eighth note may be predetermined for you by how quick your song is. But at these slower, more popular kind of trappy pop tempos, I love playing with the 16th notes, and it's almost so workable that it could work it just in a lot of different places. Let's go ahead and check this out. That almost worked. I think that worked. I think we would need another hit there. But again, you can kind of see my point. A lot of these do work, and it's a pretty subjective choice from there. So I really liked how it was sitting with doubling up here on the 1E, the first two 16th notes of the bar. And then lastly, I just want to show you a nice 4-bar example, because we're going to have the same first 2 bars here. But then if you want to create a really full 4-bar progression, I'll make sure that what's happening on the 4th bar is unique. So we essentially have an A, B, A, C format as far as the kick drum patterns in each bar. So we have our A. I'm falling on anxiety, swiping my reality away. Back to A. No company, no misery, just don't check my mental health grade. High above your ego now. And then we have something different, something we haven't heard. And on top of that, sometimes these 4-bar loops, these extra little nuggets of nuance and difference in a phrase really push the song forward, because not only does that work in the cycles of 2 with the chord progression, but now we're going up to a melodic change, and just these subtle kick hits is kind of signaling a change for myself. It's priming my ears to say, ooh, something exciting's happening, or we're kind of reaching the conclusion of this and we're going to come back around and get it going. So again, just the principle is try adding just one 16th note, one 8th note, depending on your tempo, and trying in a couple of different locations. It will really liven up how your patterns and how your grooves feel overall. Next, I want to talk about the power of layering in Foley or found sounds into your grooves. This has become incredibly more popular. It had definitely a time of prominence. I think back to Michael Jackson style productions and how they would take real world samples and create them into drum grooves and patterns. And it's made a really incredible resurgence recently, and I'm really excited about it because people are taking all kinds of different sounds and integrating it into their grooves, and it just adds this sense of depth and texture that we don't get when we're limited to whether it's a real kit or just these standard electronic kits, trap kits, hip hop kits, because we're essentially getting some things that we would never expect to hear rhythm out of, and we're hearing rhythm from them. So I wanted to show you an example. Here, this is the raw sample that I pulled. This is from an NPM Make Pop Music pack. This is a sample of typing. Now, when I bring it, this is the sample as it is. I had filtered out some low end here. That's it with the finger taps, but I didn't really want any of that. I want it to essentially, I like to bring in Foley sounds to accentuate what can already be there and just add an extra sense of depth and unexpected texture. Again, it's just a little bit of excitement. It's not just a hi-hat loop. It's not just that. There's a little something in there that's adding some spice and flavor and texture that combined really elevates the track. So the first thing I do is I'll bring it in, and I know that is not the right tempo. But that's okay because we have the power of computers and we can change that pretty quickly. Now this will change and vary by your DAW. In Pro Tools, I go ahead and click over here and hit TCE. And I set the loop up to already start on the downbeat, so all I have to do is click and drag. And boom, it's in tempo, and it should play back in time with our hi-hat. Which of course sounds kind of awkward on its own. But now if I go ahead and solo that with drums, we can use this as a way to create a new sense of flavor with any kind of a Foley loop. You can find so many different great things in different packs, but this just creates an extra sense of texture, an extra sense of the unexpected in our song, and especially in the section where I want to add some oomph to it. So again, take a listen with and without this loop. So here it is without.
I'm falling on anxiety, swiping my reality away.
And then with.
I'm falling on anxiety, swiping my reality away. No company.
It's really subtle, but again, it's just there's a little extra energy of something that's not the norm that we would expect in this kind of a song, and I really like that about it. And keep in mind, there's so much you could do with a loop like this or any kind of a Foley loop. I could potentially add distortion, crunch or saturation, or maybe a little bit of a reverb to add different depth and really make it sit in the mix. But again, the premise is to take something that is a loop that we wouldn't expect to have in there, a Foley loop or just a Foley sound, and incorporate it into our groove so we have not just the expected tones of a drum kit. We have a little something different, and it will make your ear kind of pick up when you're like, oh, what is that going on? Even if it's mixed in really subtly. The next thing I want to talk about is the power of removing the fourth beat at the end of a phrase. This sounds like such a specific idea, but it's so fun because one of my favorite premises in working with grooves is to play with expectation. And in any song, we always, that backbeat is kind of like the meat and potatoes. It's what keeps us bobbing, it's what keeps us moving. And when we take that away for even just one hit, it has this really jarring breath-holding moment. And I really like that. And I really get excited when I hear that in a song. So it's something to use really sparingly, because if you overuse it, it doesn't get special. But let me show you what I'm talking about here. So here is Savannah's verse.
Measures call me delusional. I guess it's mutual. Been picking fights, so uptight, got me collecting restless nights. You got that filter on and
oh, that's getting super reverby from our first example. But to show you, this had all of the downbeats in it. It had the 1, 2, 3, and 4, especially in this last bar. This is the important part.
been picking fights, so uptight, got me collecting restless nights. You got
And then it picked up. But watch what happens when we take the 4 beat away.
I guess it's mutual. Been picking fights, so uptight, got me collecting restless nights. You got that filter.
Whoa. I mean, to me, that's pretty impactful. Like, the fact that, again, we're 2 minutes into this song, maybe almost 2.5 because I do start a little bit later than the first bar 0. But at this point, we're so expecting that chord, that hit on beat 4. There's just the expectation to have that drop. But when we take it away, just for a moment,
I guess it's mutual. Been picking fights, so uptight, got me collecting restless nights.
It just takes your breath away. And what's wonderful about doing it on beat 4 is then we get back to it. We're not... The reason I like this is a great way to play with subverting expectation in a way that's safe, quote safe, where sometimes we get in the weeds of talking about rhythmic displacement and all these cool concepts, but it can kind of be easy to mess it up. This is something where if you just drop 1 4 beat in your song, you can take somebody's breath away for just a beat, bring it back, and then we continue forward. So we've got, and then they come back. So it's just such a subtle move, and I really like it. I hope my body language is expressing it correctly, at least the impact of how I feel it creatively. So the last thing I want to show you today is how you can use pitch informant automation to create some really interesting drum transitions. Now, this is typically something where you're catapulting up or sliding down in energy and using this automation kind of as a vehicle to facilitate that. I almost think of it like sliding up on a guitar or sliding down on a guitar, but for drums. So let me go ahead and just show you an example, and then we'll go ahead and talk about it in depth. Nothing too crazy, but it's just so powerful in making us feel like we're going somewhere creatively. And let me show you what that sounds like without it. Not that that's bad, but when we have this in here, and we have this... Again, it's kind of like with the beat 4 thing. We get a little bit of sense of unsteadiness, and then, well, boom, we right back. So this is something I'll do over the course, typically of a bar. It's more of a transitional bar thing for my personal use, but of course, take this and run with it. So the way that I'll set this up is I will go ahead and open up a plugin with pitch, formant, or both as mix parameters. Little Alter Boy has both of them here. Now, this plugin is specifically made to alter vocals. That's the key choice of this plugin. So it handles things in a certain way that can be really cool on certain drums, or it could sound kind of maybe odd. It may not be the exact desired result because this is specifically tuned or created for vocals. So keep that in mind, but I actually kind of like how weird the results can be because it's kind of made for vocals. The personal choice, anything that just formant, throat length, or pitch will do. So I'll open up those lanes, and I typically like to start by playing with the formant parameter, and then I'll go down the whole octave, and then just hear how that sounds. And that typically is where I want to take it, but just to show you, this is what happens if you go the other way. Now, that's not necessarily what I want to do. So I need to go ahead and flip it back the other way. But you'll notice that we do lose a little bit of volume when we're changing pitch like that. And then when it comes back in on the downbeat, it's almost too loud. So whenever I automate a formant or pitch, I want to make sure I'm compensating with a little bit of volume automation before we get back, and then returning it back before we get to the downbeat. So depending on the shape, I'm automating up the volume in contrast to the formant. So the formant's being messed up, and then the volume's coming up, as you can see here. And this volume will rise anywhere from 4 to 6, maybe even 7 dB, just depending on the source tone and how crazy the formant shift is and the perception of loudness. Now that feels a lot more full. We're not losing the fullness of the drum, and that's really what we're going for here. So again, just to show you now in context.
Afraid of what comes next, obsess and suppress, I guess.
And then without that effect.
Afraid of what comes next, obsess and suppress. I guess I'm falling.
Again, not a bad, doesn't sound bad without it, but this is just a little extra flair, the little extra flavor that's going to really push it over the edge and just add that extra ear candy to spice up your grooves, make them more exciting, and allow you to get more done in the box for a really engaging rhythm section. Appreciate having you today. Now get out there, work hard, and make something incredible. Cheers.